everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm giving you guys a very in-depth tutorial on why I use pastels and exactly how I use them so it can give your models that extra sense of realism. If you find any of this helpful, make sure to click the subscribe button down below and the like button and check out my channel for more model horse content. First thing when you're looking to invest in pastels, personally I use PanPastels, but I will get into all that here in a minute. You want to look at the kind of changes that you can do on your model horse. So first you need to look at what some horses can look like without pastels, which is shown here, and then compare it to a horse that does have pastels on it. So if you look at it, it has a lot more dimension in it than the one without pastels. It just gives a lot of nice shading that a horse would naturally have. You're able to do a lot more detail on the muzzle and the eyes and around the joints, and overall it just helps your horse look a lot more realistic. Yes, it takes a lot of practice, but once you get the hang of it, it's honestly not that hard to use. But make sure to watch this whole video so you can see all the tips and tricks on how to make sure that your pastels come out as smooth as you can get them. Let's take a look at what kind of pastels I use. Personally, over time, I've started to shift over to PanPastels. So PanPastels is a brand of chalk pastels that is already grinded up for you. They are very nice and very pigmented and come in a wide variety of colors, so it makes it pretty easy to get any shade that you need. However, they are about $10 a piece. Some are $8. Often I just consider them as 10. However, if you do have a little bit more of a lower budget, I started out using some just chalk pastels, how they are. If you want to go to your local craft store or anything like that, you can get just sticks of chalk pastel, and then I will actually take a strainer and grind them up that way and turn it into powder. That way, once it's powder, it's very easy to apply to your model. So as I stated before, if you use PanPastel, everything should be good to go from when you order them to when you get them. Everything should be good and set. It's going to look pretty solid when you first open it, but once you start using it, you're going to realize that it is just powder that's kind of packed together. Then if you are using those chalk pastels that you can find anywhere, please make sure that they are chalk pastels. You can take a strainer like I have. It was like one that I had in the kitchen, but I ended up using it and getting a new one anyway. And then I just rub it over the strainer and it will turn into powder. And then that is what you are going to want to use. So once you have your powder set and ready to go, make sure that it is a little bit darker than what your horse's base coat color is. When you start with pastels, you're always going to want your horse's base coat to be quite a bit lighter than what you actually want it to be, because these pastels are going to darken it over time as you layer it up. That is probably my biggest point here, is try not to do pastels in only one layer. If you really want the best effect, I would say aim for 3 to 5 layers, and that will yield the best results for you. Although it does depend on your personal preference and what you decide that you want to do. But back to the color of your pastels, you want your model horse to be, the base coat of paint to be quite a bit lighter than what you actually want it to be, because then you're going to grind pastels up to be a shade or 2 darker, maybe even 3 if you want something really drastic, and slowly build that up. With the first layer, I try to coat the whole horse in a layer of pastel that is exactly the shade of the horse that I'm using, if not maybe even a little bit lighter, because pastels will darken when you spray them with a matte spray to seal it. So I will cover the horse in pastels. Make sure you do not rub it over the model. I like to use an up and down patting motion instead of rubbing it, because if you rub it, if your horse has any texture on it, it is going to come out very grainy because you're shoving pastels into the little texture crevices on it when you want it to be smooth. That is also why I will spray my horse before I start pastel, to try and give it more of a smooth base so I can try to not have that graininess effect. Then after you have your horse coated in that slightly lighter color or same shade, go ahead and add on some darker areas in the places that you want it to be. So that's going to be on the rear of the horse, on the back of the horse, the shoulder, going down into its midsections, but not around the place, the corner of where the hip kind of is. And then on the neck, the muzzle, a little bit on the eyes, a little bit on the ears, and then around the neck and underneath the stomach as well. Make sure your lighter shade that you applied on first is well blended with the darker shade that you just applied. Then go ahead and go outside, spray your model, seal it all in, and then allow it time to dry. Personally, I like to give it between 30 minutes and 60 minutes before I begin on the next layer. That is the minimum that I would recommend, because if you start on it too soon, you can start putting pastel on it and the spray won't be set. So when you spray it again, it is going to have very dark areas of pastel where it is super pigmented, which is not what you want. Spray doesn't fully set up for about 24 hours after you spray it. However, I haven't had any problems with starting the next layer of pastels about an hour after the first time I sprayed it. By then, it should be dry to the touch and smooth enough for you to start on the next layer. So on the second layer, you're really going to want to focus on the dark areas. So again, go back over the back, the rear, underneath the stomach, the shoulder, the neck, the muzzle, maybe the eyes if you need to, the legs, and I can't remember if I said under the stomach or not, but that too. Then go back outside and spray your horse again. And then before you start on the next layer, remember waiting roughly an hour or so before you start on the next layer. And then personally, this is where I like my final layer to be before the varnish starts getting too thick. However, 5 layers is also just fine as long as you're doing thin coats. Basically, any layers after this, you're just going to want to build up the pastels to where you want the shade to be. So every time that I add a new layer, I usually try to go slightly inside where I just did the last layer. So if you had the base coat, then you would have kind of a wide area on the back, and then the next layer would be a little bit more in, and then in a little bit more again, and so on and so forth. That way it gives you that nice gradient, and you're just going to continue to build stuff up until you think your pastels are done. Remember to move your brush in an up and down patting motion and not side to side. That side to side will lead to graininess, and that is not what you want. Then after you finish pastels, I would recommend letting the horse sit for 24 hours before you begin on markings, mane and tail, eye details, hoof details, anything like that. However, after you do finish the pastels, I hope everything has worked well for you. If you have any questions, make sure to leave them down below so I can answer them best I can. And I hope you guys have an amazing day, and I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.